All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give it just another minute for everyone to join in, but this is the November version of the NASEO Energy Security Committee. We're really excited for you all to be here today. We have a small panel of speakers, both from the NASEO staff, the State Energy Office world, and then a National Lab representative as well. We're a month behind, but we're actually going to be talking about cybersecurity today, specifically a few programs that energy offices are involved in or could be involved in, and some of the more innovative functions that we're looking at, as well as some of the more novel and continued topics. As a heads up, as you can probably see in the upper right hand of this screen, this meeting today is going to be recorded. We had a few folks that were not able to attend and asked that we record it and share afterwards because, like I said, it's going to be a great panel. So just as a heads up there. Additionally, when we get to the Q&A, we do encourage everybody to come on camera and speak to everybody face to face as best we can virtually. We found that that certainly helps with a more interactive and personable discussion. Before we get kicked off, I'm gonna put a plug for a heads up in December. We'll be having an EV cybersecurity specific webinar, date TBD, but it will be after Thanksgiving and before Christmas. So you all can wait on bated breath, but hopefully we'll have something confirmed for you by the end of the week. So today we're going to start with actually a quick overview of one of the more relevant CATS tools that NASEO produced a couple years ago. For those of you that aren't aware of CATS, it's the Cybersecurity Advisory Team for State Solar. I'm going to quickly do a review of the main elements of that tool. And just noting up front that we're highlighting this tool in particular because it's been used by a number of different offices for both solar procurement and for other programs looking at cybersecurity considerations in some of the procurement language. So we're really encouraged to see that resource be utilized and leveraged, and we hope that it can continue to be a resource for you all and something that we can build on moving forward with the support of you and our federal partners. So I won't spend too long on it because I think we've reviewed it a number of times before. But if you all give me just a second. Okay, how is this looking? Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so here's our procurement guide. The language is pretty high level and straightforward and doesn't include too many state-specific examples, but takes from a number of existing federal and industry resources. Part of this is looking at supply chain limitations, so components or assets that are coming from particular nation states that may not be particularly friendly to the United States or our critical energy infrastructure. So this breaks it down into two general categories. One is the asset and component level, and two is looking at some of the cybersecurity requirements of any vendors or contractors or subcontractors that you might be working with. And the point of this is for some of the physical asset procurement, you want to make sure that those supply chains are cyber secure. And then on the vendor and third party side of this resource, we want to make sure that the folks that you're working with are doing their due diligence in internal cybersecurity. So any information that is shared between you and your vendors is cyber secure, and that any practices are also cyber secure, so they are not jeopardized by any incident. As the title of this resource implies, this is directed at solar systems in particular. However, a lot of the federal language and general procurement guidance can also be applied to DERs generally. So just something to keep that in mind if you take an extra look at it. There are a number of decision trees both included in here and referenced via different links. And this can help folks that are maybe not as familiar with procurement generally ask some basic questions to get a better understanding of what some leading federal and industry practitioners are looking at. And that can help you inform or design procurement guidance for solar or DER assets in the future. There are some language cutouts for performance contracts. These are mostly looking at the internal operations of performance contractors, but do have some asset level language as well. Next here is the cybersecurity maturity model certification. This is based off of a DoD DoD resource, but we included this in here because of a number of federal and state overlap with the Department of Defense, as well as other military entities. Potential entry points for cybersecurity language. This gets into a little bit more specific framework and verbiage that you can actually drop straight into any procurement or contract resources. And then, as usual, there are a number of model resources and other legal backing language inclusions in this resource too. So really, that's it for me. Just wanted to kind of tee up the rest of our conversation, but did want to more importantly note that this resource we're taking a more thorough look at, and we'll be updating it in the near future by hook and or by crook. So if you have any thoughts on where you might want to see this resource head, or if you are aware of your office or any other state agencies leveraging this resource or using it for other programs, that's really helpful for us to know about in terms of feedback, what worked well, what didn't. Like I said, this resource was used by a state for some of their EV charging infrastructure, cybersecurity procurement language, which is a really great example and something, an unintended benefit of this resource. So without any further ado, we're going to get into our speakers, really the reason why we're here. So we have 3 follow-up speakers. Each will have about 10 or 15 minutes. Actually, Megan, I think, is going to have a little bit longer right off the bat. But after each presentation, we'll have some time for Q&A. So we encourage everybody to, again, come on camera at that point, and feel free to ask our presenters anything you want. But first off, we have Megan Culler with the Idaho National Laboratory, who's going to be discussing the Solar to Grid, or S2G, initiative and supply chain security. So Megan, the floor is yours, and let me know if you have any trouble sharing your screen.
Thanks, Campbell. Is my screen visible?
Yep, looks good.
I don't think it's in presentation mode, but I'm not sure if that's going to work. Go to presentation mode?
It's still in normal format.
Okay, yeah, I didn't think it was going to work. So we'll just leave it like this. I think it's hopefully big enough. Yes, so my name is Megan Culler. I am a power engineer and researcher with Idaho National Laboratory. My background is in power systems and cybersecurity, and a lot of the work that I do focuses on risk resilience and cybersecurity for power systems, with a fairly heavy focus on things that are affecting the energy transformation. So deployment of clean energy technologies and inverter-based resources, grid enhancing technologies, just the overall digitization of a lot of the things that we're using on the grid today, and looking at how to integrate those safely and securely. Today I'm going to be talking about the Securing Solar for the Grid project, the S2G project, and some of the supply chain security work that we've done under that project. So I'm going to start with just an overview of Securing Solar for the Grid. Some of you may have heard of this project before, especially if you're familiar with some of the CATS efforts, because this is a related cybersecurity for solar project funded by the Department of Energy. But this project is a lab project, a collaboration between Idaho National Laboratory, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and Sandia National Laboratories. The overall vision for S2G is to achieve high cybersecurity maturity for solar technologies, equipment, supply chains, facilities, as well as their connected distribution systems as well. The hope that we're trying to get out of this, looking for increased standardization or inclusion of solar considerations into standardization, development of best practices, equipment testing, procedures, assessment tools, and education and training materials. And I've lost my mouse now, but let's see if the arrows work. No. I have a mouse over here. Oh, there's my mouse. Okay. Maybe. All right. I'm not going to be cooperative today. That's okay. We'll get there. All right. So the research areas under S2G are kind of grouped into these three large categories of standards development and best practices, education and workforce development, and development of a cybersecurity toolkit and supply chain. I would almost break up that last group into two categories. I think the toolkits are focused more on risk assessment and that supply chain piece. Certainly there's a cyber risk assessment piece to supply chain, but also doing more on the research and development area there to investigate best practices for supply chain security. One way to look at this as well is that as we kind of work up this chain from the device to the plants to aggregators to the system, we're looking at different levels of what types of research and development is needed as well. So this project started in 2022. We have finished the first 3 years of this project, and we're starting the next 3 years of this project that will go through 2027. Similar types of goals here, similar continuation, similar partnership teams here, but really looking to bring it to that next level of demonstration and deployment of some of the technologies that we've started to develop under the first stage of the project, do more testing, get some of the risk assessment tools that we've developed outside of that demonstration phase and really into that deployment stage. And there's a very heavy focus on industry engagement with a bunch of different stakeholders, of which state energy offices are certainly one, due to the impact that you guys can have on how a lot of these things are implemented, especially at the distribution level. So if you're looking for more information or if you want to be involved in solar PV cybersecurity, I do want to make a call for our roadmap for PV cybersecurity. There was an initial version of this roadmap that was published in 2017, but it was intended to be a 5-year strategy. And of course, that 5 years has now passed. So we're in the process of updating this roadmap. The intent is to kind of walk through some of the key areas of solar cybersecurity and look at what are the challenges that remain, what advancements have we made since 2017, but what challenges remain both at the research level that labs and academia can help address, as well as at the industry level where we need deployment support. And these goals are focused on the near term, midterm, and long term, like which ones can be addressed in the near term, midterm, and long term. So if this is something that is of interest to you and you want an early preview of this roadmap, I would encourage you to reach out to me. I'll provide my contact information at the end. And I would love to send you a copy of this. You don't have to review the whole thing. You can pick a couple of sections that are interesting to you, and any feedback you have on the things that you're seeing in terms of key challenges and key steps to address these challenges would certainly be appreciated. All right, so that's my background on S2G. The primary thing I was asked to talk about here today was supply chain security. I'm going to be talking about this through the lens of solar, but like Campbell said for the CATS guide, a lot of this is more broadly applicable to other inverter-based resources, other distribution assets. Certainly there's some shifts depending on the technology, but just to give the motivation, I'll be talking a little bit more about solar. currently sitting at about 3.95% based on 2023 EIA data.
Ownership of the property, and then we would.
And we've got goals based to increase to much higher levels by 2035 and 2050. These goals are fairly aggressive. The ones that I'm showing here is for the needs for a zero carbon grid with enhanced electrification. The baseline targets are a little bit lower than this. And none of this is a surprise, but we've got to do, if you can look at just kind of the change in resource mix here, even to 2030 based on some of these data and these goals from both the Wind Energy Technologies Office and the Solar Energy Technologies Office. There's a lot of progress to be made both in capacity, but when we start looking at how that capacity translates to number of devices, it almost starts to look even more aggressive. So this is some calculations we did to estimate how many more devices might be connected, whether that's wind turbines or solar plants based on some average sizes. And really where I'm going with this is just that we have already a lot of digital devices on the grid, but as solar deployments increase, we're going to have even more connected devices on the grid. And most of those devices are going to come from outside of the United States. Currently, most of the global PV manufacturing is occurring in China. That statistic, that 90%, is primarily referring to the solar panels themselves, or really the solar cells and the solar modules, which are then assembled into the panels, sometimes in other places before they're shipped to the United States. But even as we start looking at some of the digital components as well, we see that a lot of these have ties back to China. We can trace it all the way back to the raw materials challenges and the production of semiconductors that goes into those core digital components. Certainly there is a goal to move more of this manufacturing to the United States, both in the solar panel manufacturing side as well as the digital side. But this is something that is going to take time. And really the focus has so far had more of an impact on those solar cells and modules. Inverters have not yet seen as much of a transition towards more domestic manufacturing. And then just a note, why do we care that it's China? The goal here is not to say that things that are coming that are not domestic are bad, or even that these Chinese companies are bad, but we do want to note that China is one of the named foreign entity of concerns, or countries that leads to a designation of foreign entity of concern, which are foreign entities that are owned by, controlled by, or subject to the jurisdiction or direction of a government of a foreign country that is a covered nation, which includes the PRC, as well as Russia, North Korea, and Iran. But as we know, most of that production that we're thinking about here is coming from China. And that concern there is, again, not that those companies are bad, but just that there are laws within those countries that mandate things like the disclosure of vulnerabilities to the Chinese government within 2 days of those being discovered, and can prohibit the disclosure of vulnerabilities to any other entity. There's also close ties between a lot of these companies and their corporate structures with the government. So again, we're not trying to say that these companies are bad, but there are geopolitical considerations there. So I mentioned that most of the panels are manufactured in China. When we start looking at the inverters and the other digital components, we can really start to break this down into a lot of different pieces of inverters. And really, again, what we're looking at here, the pieces that we're concerned about, are the controllers and the communication assets. And most of the chips that are making up some of these key digital components do come from China. We do see that when you actually look at the inverter shipments, which is kind of an indicator for where some of these things are manufactured and assembled, the percentage here of Chinese inverters is actually much lower compared to what we might have expected based on that solar panel information. But although these inverters can be designed and assembled even in the United States, the application-specific integrated circuits and semiconductor power handling components are almost entirely produced in Asia. So really the point here is just that it's going to be difficult to reduce the risk of that foreign interference unless some of those embedded electronic components can also be produced in the United States. So the answer here is not that we need to fix all of the problems, although there's certainly a drive to push some investment towards building these capabilities in the United States. The CHIPS Act was one that was passed last year to boost domestic production of advanced batteries and battery materials, along with more of those computer chips as well. But at the end of the day, we're going to continue to have a foreign supply chain. So we need to be able to operate through that real and perceived risk despite that, and put in mitigations around that. Another note here, so the implications of Build America, Buy America on the solar industry and what that means for supply chain security. The overall requirement here, this applies to federal awardees as well as subrecipients. So this doesn't necessarily apply to all private investment, but it does apply to projects that are funded with federal dollars. The key piece here was focused on iron and steel used in the project is produced in the United States. From a cyber perspective, that's certainly not going to be as impactful. The manufactured products is really where that gets a little bit more interesting. So the manufactured product was manufactured in the United States. The component or the cost is also considered. And we're looking at that target eventually of 55% of the total cost of components in the manufactured product or things that were manufactured in the United States. Again, right now that number is 40%, but that number is set to rise to 55%, although it's still to be seen how a change in administration may affect how this is all implemented and what it means to be a manufactured product and how that domestic content is calculated. One way to do this is to, so I guess first, what is a manufactured content or a manufactured product? From a PV perspective, the steel and iron requirements may apply to the PV racks or foundations or screws. Again, from a cybersecurity perspective, that part is not as interesting, but the manufactured product can cover the PV module, the inverter, the tracker, and other things, which could include controllers or other communication equipment. One way that we can calculate this domestic content bit is by looking at the cost of labor and materials. So the cost of domestic labor and domestic materials must reach that 40% or eventually that 55% mark compared to that total cost, which would include the cost of foreign materials. Another way that this can be broken down is by component. So each component, that PV module, the inverter, the tracker, can be broken into subcomponents, and there is guidance on percentage of the total system that these pieces make up, that these subcomponents make up. And so then you kind of either get the credit for that component or you don't. Either that subcomponent is manufactured in the US or it's not. This can be, just depends on kind of what the manufacturing processes are as to whether which calculation method is better. But the note here is that you can only claim that production credit. You can only claim the credit for each subcomponent if it's fully manufactured in the US, and that production, which would kind of be the labor piece of it, can only be claimed if all of the subcomponents are also 100% domestic. So the goal here with what we're talking about today is just to kind of talk a little bit about what this challenge is and what some of the long-term solutions in terms of federal investment in building up the domestic supply chain look like and what their impact is on solar inverter, solar manufacturing, but specifically some of those digital components, those manufactured products in the United States. What we would recommend, we always advise applying cyber-informed engineering, so consequence-based frameworks, to look at what are those worst-case consequences that can happen through digital means, through cyber intrusions into a system. Tracking back what are those paths that would lead to those worst-case consequences, and then applying mitigations, not just cybersecurity controls, but engineered controls to these projects to reduce the likelihood of reaching that worst-case consequence. Resilience and security can be considered in all topics. The very good example is procurement language. That's not something where perhaps necessarily cybersecurity would take a front row seat, but there is guidance on that kind of language that can be added to help put some requirements on vendors and provide a little bit more insight and oversight into some of these supply chain practices. Cyber plans should also kind of, I mean, this works both ways. So within the cyber plans, we should be considering supply chain security as well. Certainly there's a bunch of different guidelines that can kind of impact what is required. Again, that Buy America, Build America, Buy America Act is really only something that applies or can be enforced for federal projects. But if you want that tax credit, applied for federal projects, or if you want that tax credit. The National Defense Authorization Act is another one that kind of highlights some of those foreign entity of concern considerations and provides some limitations against specific companies too that may be prohibited for use with federal funding or for use in DoD sites. If you want to learn more about some of the supply chain research that we're doing, including some upcoming things we've got on developing and using hardware bills of materials and software bills of materials, certainly you can keep an eye out on the Securing Solar for the Grid website, which is where we post all of the resources from across the project. And if this is a topic that is really exciting to you, I would encourage you to reach out and join our industry advisory board. This group meets twice a year, once virtually, once in person, but we give you regular updates on some of the research that is going on and more opportunities to engage with these research teams. Let's see, yes, we've got those upcoming materials for solar inverters, and then INL also leads a couple of other projects, including one called BESSY and one called Technical Assistance for Digital Assurance, that are looking at, it's a broader look at digital energy technologies and supply chain security, using some of those cyber-informed engineering principles, and providing technical assistance specifically to awardees of federal projects, but you don't have to be an awardee of a federal project to get access to some of these resources. With that, that's all the information I have to share today, but I'm happy to have a discussion with this group and answer any questions.
Thanks, Megan. We had one initial question in the chat. Will the slide deck be sent out? Eli, for your reference, we are recording this and we'll send that out, but Megan, any issues with distributing these afterwards?
Nope, no issues. These have been approved for release. Okay,
great. And then because we've been sharing it far and wide as well, we're going to just drop the link to the Grid Resilience Cyber TA in the chat. We're certainly excited about it, and it really applies to every state for the Grid Resilience Formula funding, the 401(d), and also for GRIP. So we really encourage everybody to look at that. We've had a few conversations with Megan and her colleagues over the past couple weeks, and they have a lot of additional details and fun types of technical assistance that they can provide for those programs. So we really encourage you to take a look at those or get in contact with Megan and her team. All right, any other questions for Megan right now? Oh, Eli, go ahead.
Hey there. So I'm from Washington State. I'm Eli King. I'm the Energy Resilience and Emergency Management Director. Um, I had some questions since you mentioned technical assistance for the 401D our state, because my office is not that grant program actually did not include cybersecurity. So is there a way we could still get connected? Even if it's not through the 401D, and would be interested to hear from other states if you all specifically excluded cybersecurity for the grid for that program or not. Thanks.
I think I can answer part of that, which is just that the formal technical assistance program through GDO is focused on GRIP awardees and other federal projects. But we have funding from CSER as well, which engages in similar types of activities that does not have those types of restrictions. So certainly if that's something you're interested in just learning more about, please reach out and be happy to talk about what those opportunities would look like for your projects.
Eli, this is Carrie Heinrich in the Wisconsin office. Hopefully you can hear me all right. I just wanted to clarify that specifically cybersecurity activities are excluded from 401D funding. However, there's a affirmation or a requirement that the projects include cybersecurity practices. You just can't have it the funds going directly towards cybersecurity activity.
I can only answer part of that. I still have to get clarification to answer the other piece. It's my understanding for the people implementing the program that they excluded cybersecurity implementation for energy resilience projects. Whether there's any contract language, we haven't gone down that route yet, but I'm trying to get that included. And it would be great to have NASEO recommend that folks like us are actively included in the development of the projects or programs for the 401D, since this is our daily role or as needed role. And having folks who do not have the subject matter expertise managing this program is really not in the best light of where the money is supposed to be doing.
And Eli, if you want to send us a message offline, we have a grant or for a grid resilience implementation cohort where we meet with all the designees there, and that might be a good area to field some of that. So I'm happy to touch base with you after this.
Thank you.
You got it. Okay. Any other questions for Megan at this time? Okay, hearing and seeing nothing right now. We're going to move on. Megan, thanks for your time here. We will be sending out the slides. This is still being recorded, and Megan's email has been dropped in the chat as well if you want to reach out to ask her about the S2G program or any of the other TA. Okay, moving on next. Little introduction here. As you all have either inferred or alerted us to, there are a lot of different cybersecurity touch points among the NASEO program areas. And one that we've become more recently, become more aware of is the cybersecurity elements in the transportation program, specifically in the NEVI program that NASEO is assisting with on the state level there. So just as a tiny bit of background, we are looking at additional opportunities for some cross-pollination and for cybersecurity and resilience. But Jesse Lund, who is our Senior Program Director for Transportation, is here to talk to us about some of those cybersecurity implications of NEVI and EVCI and what's happening in the transportation world too. So I'll pause here and turn it over to Jesse.
Thank you, Campbell, and hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to try to keep it brief today and make sure we have time for questions. One disclaimer before I jump in is I am a transportation expert, not a cybersecurity expert, which will probably be evident here shortly. But I'm hoping to just provide an update of how NASEO has been supporting state NEVI practitioners as it applies to cybersecurity concerns for EV charging infrastructure. To start, I'm going to throw a couple links in the chat. The first is just if you'd like to know a little bit more about broadly the NASEO support with respect to building out a national network of EV charging infrastructure. As Campbell just mentioned, much of this work has been focused on NEVI, which, if anyone's not familiar with the acronym, is the National EV Infrastructure Program. It's run out of federal highways, and it provides $5 billion over 5 years to all 50 states and DC to build out charging infrastructure, fast, high-power charging infrastructure along key corridors throughout the country. So this is something that every state is working on. And the part of the NEVI requirements, of which there are many, do have to do with cybersecurity. Specifically, states and their direct recipients are required to implement physical and cybersecurity strategies consistent with their respective state EV infrastructure deployment plans to ensure that charging station operations protect consumer data and protect against the risk or harm to disruption of charging infrastructure and the grid. As you can imagine, many of the folks within the Energy Office or the DOT, we work closely with our friends at AASHTO on this. Almost all states are running their NEVI program either through the Energy Office or through the DOT, or sometimes through an MOU between the two. But many of the folks running these are also not cybersecurity experts. So as you can imagine, we've gotten quite a few questions about cybersecurity. In fact, so many that we created a working group back in April focused specifically on cybersecurity for EV charging infrastructure. We've got a few other topical working groups, but that's obviously the one relevant to today's conversation. And I would boil down the main questions that we've received with respect to NEVI into 3 main topics. The first being states just trying to figure out what should they be asking of their awardees as it relates to cybersecurity. So without getting too into the weeds of how NEVI works, the states are not themselves building and operating and owning, maintaining charging infrastructure. They are putting out RFPs and making awards to industry who want to build and operate those charging systems. And so the federal highways has basically acknowledged that this requirement for cybersecurity will in many ways need to get passed on to those awardees, but there hasn't been much guidance on what exactly that looks like and what states should be asking of these awardees to make sure that they are implementing the appropriate cybersecurity protections. Then there are also questions, bucket 2, of how should states essentially evaluate the response from the awardees? How do they know that whatever the folks developing the charging systems tell them they're doing for cybersecurity is actually sufficient, particularly given what we talked about, that many of them are not themselves cybersecurity experts. And then bucket number 3, you probably could have guessed, is essentially what happens when something happens, when something goes wrong with one of these charging stations, if there is a cybersecurity threat or incident. And so we spent a lot of time really on that first bucket of what states should be asking of NEVI awardees to just set themselves up for success. And the working group has developed a host of recommendations over the last 6 months or so. The main one has to do with this question. And luckily, we were able to draw on some best practices that are arising in the industry and with states. And we learned that the state of Tennessee, along with HNTB, a consultant, and the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, had already been working to develop a draft NEVI awardee cybersecurity plan template of what they will have each awardee fill out and submit back to them. And so the working group has recommended that all states adopt this same plan template for all of their awardees as a way to keep it easy for states, but also to streamline things for industry. A lot of the charging awardees are applying not just in one state, but in many, if not all. And so the goal is to make this simpler for everyone. The good news is that template is nearly final. There was a final draft from the Tennessee team and HNTB, and then at our National EV Charging Infrastructure Conference back in late September, where we had industry there as well. One of the recommendations that came out of the working group in-person session was that industry wanted an opportunity to review it and provide feedback. And so that has happened over the last few weeks. They've provided input. The Tennessee team and HNTB are working to integrate that feedback, and it is near final. It's basically going through final approvals right now. And so I expect that template to be final and public, at least to states, any day now. All the NEVI practitioners at the state will be receiving a note once that is final. And that document will also live in our EV States clearinghouse, which if you don't have access to and would like, I'm happy to help get you all set up, or otherwise feel free to reach out to your NEVI lead within your state. They all have access to this online clearinghouse. So that's the main recommendation I wanted to talk about today, just to let you all know that that was coming. But I do want to just briefly touch on some of the other recommendations that have come from the working group thus far. Another one was the working group would like to see us develop a NEVI cybersecurity FAQ document that could be shared with all of you on this call, for example, but also with other cybersecurity experts within the state. We'll be working on that over the next few months. They are also suggesting that state NEVI practitioners work to build relationships, again, with all of you, as well as with other, chief information officers, chief information security officers, fusion centers, basically other experts at the state, and potentially even invite those folks in to help review the plans that are submitted using that template we talked about earlier. Again, going back to the other recommendations, also asking all state NEVI practitioners to review their state energy security plans that I know many of you have worked long and hard on, so that they ensure that they understand how cybersecurity hazards are handled at the state. And we'll also be working with PNNL to develop an incident notification form template. In fact, that one is also near done, and we're working with them on next steps for implementation with the states. And then the final recommendation is the working group is interested in working with the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation to host an incident response tabletop exercise. That will likely be state by state just for those who are interested, but that's something else that the NEVI practitioners have flagged that they're interested in. And then finally, before I open it up for questions, just want to note that PNNL also asked me to share with this group that in order to support compliance with one of the NEVI requirements around consumer data privacy, the Joint Office has funded them to develop a privacy framework specifically tailored to the EV charging ecosystem. And that framework will be designed for charging station operators and grantees and provide practical guidance, and we'll be working with them to ensure that as that comes together, that states are involved in developing it and certainly have access to the final version. And I see Sarah put my email in the chat. So yes, please feel free to reach out if you'd like to touch base separately. Otherwise, happy to take any questions now if we have time.
Yeah, I think we've got time for a few. Thank you, Jesse. I know Sarah and I have a million questions on this, but obviously want to open it to the floor before we dive in a little bit, and want to make sure we have time for our last speaker as well. More of a question for the audience, though, but in a quick pulse check, how many of you were not aware of the cybersecurity requirements or ongoings of your transportation teams within your office?
I was definitely aware. In Tennessee.
Yeah, we know.
Yeah, it's not really fair.
Carrie, Ed, and if you all have questions too, please
just noting that I was not aware. It's an entirely different agency, so I stuck to my silo.
I was aware.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
breaking down the silos here in Virginia. Definitely great work, and I appreciate the resources.
Excellent. Yeah, and we're planning to engage Jesse in the transportation group more on this, but she did have a really good plug. That definitely wasn't something that we fed to her to say, but inclusion of some of this stuff in a state energy security plan would be just a great synergy for future iterations. All right. Any other questions for Jesse?
A quick question. Hi, everyone. This is Hannah in Oregon. Is that template going to be sent out? I guess, will it be sent out to all state energy offices so we can make sure it gets to our appropriate agency, or how will that process go?
Yeah, great question, Hannah. So basically, we have our kind of listserv internally of all the state energy office and DOT staff who are managing their NEVI program within the state. So we'll send it out to that full list, obviously also to our cybersecurity working group, which is kind of a subsection of that list. And then the final template will also get posted to that EV States clearinghouse that I mentioned. And I'll throw a link to that in the chat as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Right. Well, not seeing or hearing anymore. Thank you, Jesse, for your time. I know we'll be in touch more on this. And now I'd like to invite John DeRose onto camera, or at least microphone, to go over the Illinois Wastewater Treatment Plant Resilience Program. We heard a bit of a briefing during the NASEO annual meeting back in September, October from John, and sounds like they've got some really exciting stuff coming up with the water sector and looking at some cybersecurity areas there too. So, John, all yours.
All right. Thanks, Campbell. Hi, everyone. John DeRosa, Office of Energy here at Illinois EPA. I'm the manager and policy advisor. Yeah, so we do have a new program for wastewater treatment plants coming out for resilience in this next year. Our program in the past has really focused on wastewater treatment plants and water treatment plants and doing energy assessments and energy efficiency programs. We are a relatively small program for many years with about $4 million in funding. So we kind of focused in on the area, and over the past since 2018, we've done 168 assessments, energy assessments at wastewater treatment plants, and 60 at water treatment plants. We've been thinking more about where we're going and where we want to go as the program grows and evolves. And the next thing on our list was to focus on resilience. In 2023, there were some cyber security attacks here on our water infrastructure. It wasn't anything major, but it did happen, and our director's office definitely flagged it and wanted us to kind of look at it more closely here in Illinois. So with that, we decided to take some of our state energy program bill funding and create a program focused on resilience. Originally, we were thinking renewables, but the reality is that really is resilience and resiliency when we started looking at it. We don't have any cybersecurity or even renewable experts here in our office. We rely heavily on interagency collaborations with other state agencies who do have those experts. And we also, for this program that we're going to launch, took advantage of the Department of Energy's technical assist. So when we reach out to them, they aligned us with, they put us in contact with National Renewable Energy Laboratory. They performed a scoping session where they asked us questions on what we wanted to achieve, what we wanted to do. And then from there, from that point on, we worked closely with Department of Energy, and then they connected us with Argonne, or not Argonne, what is it? One second. Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And between DOE and Oak Ridge, we were able to pretty much create a funding opportunity that focuses on resiliency. And how we're looking to address this, we're looking at rolling this out in 3 tracks. The first, or track 1 and track 2, or having 3 tracks available. Track 1 and track 2 will focus on planning, and it will, so resiliency planning and at wastewater treatment facilities. And what we're looking at there is 2 different kind of categories. One would be open to pretty much anyone in the state, any municipality or entity or municipal governmental entity with wastewater treatment plants. And the second would be more focused on populations 10,000 and under and areas of environmental justice. And we wanted to make sure that we could cover all parts of the states and provide opportunities to everybody who wanted to do planning for resilience. And then once, so as a part of this, we have an extensive tool list that DOE and Oak Ridge was able to provide us that entities could use to do their planning. One second here. So really what we want them to do is conduct vulnerability assessments and develop the resiliency plan. These are called VARPs. I didn't know that until we started working with them, but that's used a lot. So once an entity has a VARP established, we then have another track for implementation. And this implementation is where they would take what they discovered during when they did their VARP and use those tools. And then we'd be looking at the implementation side, which would focus on monitoring and control system resilience. So sensors for data collection, integration with the supervisory control and data acquisition. So the SCADA is the way, as what I understand. So how do we harden these systems and the other access network points or access points for that to where we can reduce cybersecurity threats. Just asset hardening, you know, that consists of like overland flooding protection from rising streams and other items, treatment system resilience, so expansion of treatment capacity to accommodate high influent flows, lift station upgrades for climate-related risk, collection system resilience, transition of direct force main discharges to ponds, tanks, storage, or other means for creating temporary capacity, technologies to limit sewer system overflows. I think with a lot of the issues with climate change and the extreme weather that we see, I think some of that has to do, you know, some of the items here really are looking at when we get in those extreme situations. And then the last component here for our implementation phase would be integration of on-site, off-site renewable energy sources, so wind, solar, geothermal, microhydroelectric, combined heat and power, biogas, anything that could be identified in that VARP or that was included in there could be eligible, or anything even as far as energy efficiency could also be a part of this because those do go together. Right now we are in, we have the idea of what we want to do. We have some meetings here internally with our Bureau of Water here at the agency where we want to make sure that we understand all of their programs and their requirements and funding mechanisms that they have in place. So because maybe these programs can work together. We have a meeting this Friday, and then our plan is to finalize our notice of funding opportunity for wastewater treatment plants and launch that in Q1 of 2025, calendar year 2025. Yep, and that's kind of the direction we're going. Yeah, if there's any questions, let me know.
Thanks, John. Really helpful overview. There was one question in the chat from Audrey. for the tech assistance from DOE. Which office was that through? Was it SCEP? I think so.
Yes. Yeah, it
Okay.
was, yep, it was through SCEP. Yeah,
Gotcha.
we were able, so you can choose that, you can use your state energy program funding to do, yep. And that's what we did. It was a great resource. It was very efficient. Yeah, we would definitely do it again to build out a program. It was very helpful.
Great. Any other questions for John? You can rest assured that we'll be checking in with him regularly to track the great progress on this project and see what might be replicable or stealable for everybody else. But
Yeah, once we get it finalized, we'll share it. Our funding amounts might change, so that's why I'm not sharing my screen. So just based on everything that's going on, I'm not sure, we're just reassessing everything right now. So
fair enough.
Yep.
Okay, well, not seeing any additional questions. I did want to put a couple final plugs that I forgot to mention at the beginning. One, tomorrow afternoon for the NASEO membership, we will be having our post-election Washington update. Really recommend that you all attend that as you are able. If you need the link and didn't receive it in the NASEO week ahead, please reach out to us and we'll share it with you. Additionally, on December 18th, okay, thank you, Sarah. We have a tentative hold for a post SESP submission debrief and analysis and sort of what's next coming up on the board. So that will take the place of our December all hazards call, unless otherwise noted. Once we get that that date fully confirmed, then we'll send out an updated invitation, but did want to give a heads up for everyone just to say if you are available for the December all hazards call, please join because it'll be a really good opportunity to hear from DOE and PNNL and see what's going on and know what to do for the coming year. So just an early flag for that. With that, we are going to wrap up on time. Unless there are any questions that anybody has for us, we'll stick around for a couple extra minutes just in case. But thank you everybody for attending as usual, and we look forward to seeing you in various other meetings, and if not, next month during the next committee call. Have a good week, everybody.